Hey guys, I am going to show you how to set up your CorelDraw so that you can create your marble maze. So there's a couple things that we have to do that we haven't done before. So I'm here in my file. You can see that I've named my file with my initials, hour. I just put 0 for me for my example, but you'll put your hour and then maze. And then it is a 4x4 inch file in CorelDraw. So go ahead and start with that. Once you have your file open and named, we are going to add a grid to the background of it. This grid makes it really easy for us to then make our lines the appropriate distance apart. So since we are designing a maze and we have to make sure that the ball can actually fit between the walls of our maze, we want to make sure that everything's wide enough. So these little bearing balls are 0.25 of an inch, so a fourth of an inch about. So we are going to try to make sure that the pathways of our maze are, let's say, around about 0.3 of an inch. So instead of having to measure that every single time, we're going to add a grid to our workspace here that is 1/3 of an inch apart. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to go up here to the top and I'm going to click this box. It looks like a grid with like an eye in the corner of it. And when I put my mouse over it, you can see that it says show grid. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. But the problem with this grid is it always defaults to 1/4 of an inch. And the problem is if we use this grid, when we then make the walls of our maze and we make them thick enough so they print, all of a sudden it's gone from being 0.25 apart to being less than 0.25 apart. So the next thing we're going to click is this gear button here. This is pretty typical for settings or options. So I'm going to click that gear. You will get the options menu that pops up here. Now yours probably looks something like this when you first come in. So you're going to want to click the little triangle right next to document. And then you want to go click on grid. Okay, so that was the triangle next to document and grid. And then here is where we're going to change it. So right now it is 4 grid lines per inch. We want to change this to 3 grid lines per inch for the horizontal and for the vertical. So I'm going to change both those. I just backspaced and typed in my 3. And then I'm also going to check this snap to grid box. This makes it really easy when drawing lines or rectangles on our work plane. So I'm going to go ahead and click that, and I'm going to leave it as lines. Dots would work okay, but the lines kind of give us something to kind of trace as we go. So once you've done 3 and 3 for your horizontal and vertical, and you've checked your snap grid, I'm going to go ahead and click OK. You'll see that your grid changes a little tiny bit. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to my rectangle tool, and we want to make a rectangle. So we're going to make it the same size as our work plane here. So our 4x4. So I'm going to kind of go right to the corner of that square we can see. And because I have my snap grid turned on, it's really easy to do this. You can see that it created a 4x4 rectangle. So we're going to do that one first. And I know I've always said don't go to the edges of your design, but there is a reason for why we're doing that this time. It will work out for us. So I made that 4x4 rectangle by going to the corners of my squares there. And then I'm going to make a second square, 1 square in from every edge. So I'm going to go, so here from the corner, kind of go into this square, okay, go down here, okay, and then I want to make that square so that it's 1 square all the way around. Basically, we've just set ourselves 2 perimeters. Kind of in between these 2 squares is going to be kind of our border that we will later be able to kind of glue our plexiglass to. So we've already added the grid. We added our 2 rectangles. The next thing I want to do is I want to find our 2-point line tool. So if I come over here to my left side work toolbar or work bar, typically the freehand is the one we see. So I'm going to click on the little black corner of that one and go to my 2-point line. So this is one of our tool options, and this is how we're going to actually draw the walls of our maze. So I'm going to select that tool. It looks like kind of a little point with a line with a point at the end. So from here, you're just going to start kind of drawing the walls where you want them to go. So the big thing about the marble maze is we want to make sure that it's kind of complicated and it's not super easy to get from start to finish. So it is helpful sometimes to kind of think about, okay, where would you want to start? Where would you want to finish? We are going to mark that in our maze. We're just going to put a little dot of paint at kind of the start and finish so people kind of know what they're aiming for. But you want to think about it in your design. So as you're designing, we're going to design everything inside of this smaller square. So outside of that square, we're going to leave everything there. And you can just kind of start at a spot and kind of just click and drag to draw a line. You want to try to stay on the grid lines as much as possible. So I might be thinking, hey, I want my start to be down here in this corner, and I have kind of this open area here. And then you can kind of think about from there, which way do I want kind of the marble to have to travel? I always kind of think of, if I leave spaces in some of these, it makes it a little bit more difficult to get the marble to go where you want it to go. Like it might drop through that space instead of going from there. So I'm just going to keep kind of adding some lines in, think strategically. Don't just do them completely random, but try to make it a little bit difficult. Okay. Remember, if you ever have kind of that dead end, that might slow somebody down. But you're going to keep adding your lines until you have kind of your entire maze finished. I'm going to pause this video real quick, and then I'll kind of fast forward to kind of finished example. But you would keep going with your lines. I can see here I was a little bit off on this line. I could go back and edit that. But as long as it's close to it, I think it will be okay. So go ahead and keep designing. I'm going to pause and kind of fast forward. So if you want to pause the video here, finish your design, and then we'll talk about the rest in a moment. All right, so here I have my finished maze. So I've kind of added walls all throughout. I've got different sort of little dead ends. I tried to leave some openings that might make things difficult, or make students think to go one way and they have to go another, kind of having this staircase kind of effect. In my opinion, I think that would make it difficult. And I was kind of picturing kind of my start would be here in this left corner, and then my end would be here in this corner. So I have all my lines in there. I've got those two starting rectangles, and now I'm going to show you what to do next. Okay. So what we're going to do is we are going to select everything on the inside square. So you can kind of see how my mouse is tracing there. So I'm on my select tool, and I'm just going to kind of draw. Whoops, that's not what we wanted. Okay, so let's just go ahead. We'll select everything. So backtrack that statement a little bit. I thought I could do that and can't. So I'm just drew square around everything, and we're going to make all of these lines 3 points thick. So if I go to my object properties, remember that is Alt-Enter if your menu is not there. In the pen tip, I am going to change this to 3.0 points. Okay, so 3 points. You will see that thickens all of the lines, and this is going to allow it to actually 3D print kind of wide enough and be stable enough. So again, if I just Control Z and show that again, I selected everything with my select tool, went over to the pen tip and changed this to 3.0. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to select my inside square. Okay, so I'm carefully clicking on where that edge of that square is, and I'm going to give this fill a white fill. So I'm going to go to my object properties, go to the paint can, okay, and then this uniform fill item here, okay, and then if you have to kind of make adjustments, sometimes it kind of defaults more into a darker color. So I'm going to come up here and click kind of in that white corner up here. Okay, so we're going to make that white. And then the other square, so using that select tool again, I'm going to select on the edge of that outside square. We're going to make this one black. So this is what your maze should look like when you are completely done designing it. Okay, so if you need to pause this video and do those things now, please go ahead and do that. We made this outside square black, we made the inside square white, and we made all those lines 3 points thick. From here, we need to save, and then we're going to export. So that's my next step. So I'm going to go to File, Save, and then we're going to do a File Export. So hopefully you guys can see me okay in here. You can see I've done multiple versions of this. Miss Markison did a lot of experimenting to make sure that everything would work out. But we're going to save this as a JPEG. So change your file name there. Make sure your initials are at the beginning. Okay, and then I'm going to go AM0 maze. Okay, I'm saving this as JPEG. I'm going to click export. There is a second step here. So here in this export, we have to make sure that it understands and knows kind of our color choices. So where it says color mode, we're actually going to change this to grayscale. What this does is it simplifies it, makes it easier for our next program to kind of read where the lines are and where we want things to be. So I'm going to make that as grayscale, and then everything else we can just leave alone. Everything else will kind of stay the same. Here it kind of increased that width and height a little bit because we had those thicker lines. Totally okay. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Give it a second to think. Everything has been saved and exported. So there will be another video with another example about how to kind of import and convert this to an STL. So take a look in your HyperDoc for the next thing to do.